Hello Kerbonauts, and welcome to my Let's Play series where we follow the history of spaceflight and have our own adventures in Kerbal Space Program. Today we're playing with the demo version of Kerbal Space Program so everyone can play at home, but we'll use the full version of the game when our goals get a little more complex. We continue our adventure in Europe, 12 years after the end of World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union had worked together to free Europe from Nazi Germany, and Europe was divided, with each country working to rebuild Europe in the way they thought best. The United States, under the Marshall Plan, lent money to Western Europe in exchange for trade relations. The countries receiving money did very well, and with the exception of Germany, ended up being much more prosperous than they were when World War II began in 1939. The Soviet Union felt this was an attempt to attract communist countries away from communism, and after many bold statements are said about each other, the United States and the Soviet Union entered the Cold War era. Now this was a stressful time as both sides were not only building nuclear weapons, but also working on ways to deliver them to Semyorka. Once the R-7 was successful, the United States realized that having nuclear weapons delivered by bomber would not be enough to equally threaten the Soviet Union, and the space race was on. Now today we're going to play some KSP with the demo version, and we're going to build an R-7 ourselves. Our goal, because Kerbin is about 1/10 the size of Earth, instead of going for a 6,000 kilometer range, we're going to go for a 600 kilometer range. Now we're going to start again with this manned pod because it's the only one we have available in KSP, and we're getting pretty close to having to use the full version here, but we're going to try and do the R-7 with the standard pack. Now this pod here and the parachute, we're just going to pretend they're not manned and that this is just a simple nose cone. Now the R-7 Semyorka has a large fuel tank in the middle and then 4 side liquid fuel rockets that peel off when they're out of fuel. So we're going to go ahead and try to make that ourselves. Okay, so we'll start with 2 of these 800 unit fuel tanks, and then the most powerful engine I have available to me, which is the 215 max power engine here, the LVT-30. And we're going to add on 4 radial decouplers, and we'll add on 4 more side fuel tanks here. Now I do want to point out something, is that the R-7 has 4 rockets in each one of these tank pods here. I don't really have the rockets available to do that. I only have 1 mount point. Maybe later in the game we can revisit the R-7 and see if we can't build a more realistic model, but with the default pack, this is the best we can do, and it'll be more than accurate enough to try and get our goal. So let's go ahead and put some more rockets in here. I'm going to choose some more LVT-30s. And you can start to see that this rocket was very powerful, and it was built for a very heavy payload. The original hydrogen bombs that the Soviet Union was developing were very heavy. Later on they were able to modify the rocket significantly because the bombs got a lot lighter. But this design would come back and find itself useful after the Cold War, when they would modify it and still use it today for heavy lifting up to the space station and other tasks. So I've added on an extra 400 unit tank and some nose cones here. I guess the last step here would be to add in these winglets. I still am using the 4-way symmetry mode. Put on an angle snap. And as far as the demo pack goes, that's not bad. So let's go ahead and have a little look at the original R-7 and see how close we are. Now when the R-7 was first built, they didn't have their first attempt work very well, and we certainly won't either. We can see here that we've got some staging problems. So go ahead and see what happens. See the center engine isn't firing. Actually, the first R-7 had catastrophic problems itself, so we'll go back and fix the staging. Alright, now we've got all 5 engines firing at once. That's great. We're going to fire off all 4 radial decouplers when these tanks are empty. That's perfect. And then we're just going to ignore the parachute. That'll be our warhead there. So turn on the guidance, the SAS. We'll throttle all the way up. Looks great. So let's go ahead and fast forward to the part where the side tanks are getting a little empty. We'll see what altitude we're at. So something interesting is happening here, that these engines are kind of jostling around quite a bit on these radio decouplers, and the rocket grows unstable as they wiggle around and just generally don't point in the same direction. We're out of fuel at this point. But this is not what we want, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and make those side rockets a little bit more stable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come, since these are attached to the bottom, I'm going to come in here at the top. I'm just going to grab one of these struts. We're going to attach this rocket to the main body like that. Alright. Then on this side we're going to do the same thing. Alright. And I'm going to do just this one as a test, and we'll see the difference.
Some of this is a little bit of a glitch with the warp system, but I really don't want to wiggling around like that because we're starting to have problems. So just make them all stable. Okay, so now we're looking good. Perfect. Let's give this a try. Good so far. Let's give it a little warp and see what happens. Let's just keep it going. I'm not going to warp because I do think it's going to get a little glitchy here. The demo version does still have these glitches, and the full version doesn't to this degree. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to the gas and we'll see what happens. Okay, looking great. Run out. We're still going strong. So we ran out of fuel on the side pods around 52,000 meters. This is more than enough to get into orbit. Might be leaving the gravitational pull of Kerbin by the time we're done. We'll have to see how fast we're actually going over 3,000 meters per second at this point, at 115,000 meters. So when this engine runs out, we'll go check out the map. And there it is. Yeah. So we've actually exited the gravitational pull of Kerbin, so we're going so fast that we'll never come back. And this is showing me that not only have we left the gravitational pull of Kerbin, but we're now going to be in our own orbit around the Sun, a 13 billion meter orbit. So that's not really what I want. We are just trying to get 600 kilometers away, and we know that from our last two episodes that flying through the atmosphere is going to be more difficult than flying straight up in the air. So let's go ahead and test and see how far along Kerbin's surface we can get. We know we're going to have to fly above 25,000 meters because of the last episode, and we know that we want to stay under probably 70,000 meters so that we get some sort of drag on the spacecraft so that we don't go into orbit around the planet. We learned that in our first episode. So let's go see. Okay, so I know from the Kerbal Space Program wiki that the planet's circumference compared to Earth, we want to fly about 15% of the way around the planet.
while staying in the atmosphere. So if this is where we're going to take off, we need to find an enemy, and I'm going to try and fly towards the daylight. Not only will that be better for recording so you can see what's going on, but also remember the planet is revolving counterclockwise, so even if I just hovered in the same place, we'd be getting a little bit of help from the planet as it rotates around. But as it is, I'm going to aim for this island that's in the middle of this crater in Kerbin, and we'll see if we can't get most of the way there. My guess is we're going to land somewhere in this desert, but let's see how far we can get with the R-7. Okay, so I want to fly generally west, and that's a heading of 270 on the ball here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, turn our stability on. I'm going to throttle all the way up. Now I do want to get up out of this thicker atmosphere, but I don't want to waste a lot of power. We know that there's really no use to doing more than 100 meters per second over 1,000 feet, so we're going to kind of try and take it easy a little bit and save fuel. I had the feeling we're going to need it. So we're just going to keep going here. I'm going to get up past 25,000 meters. We're going to see if we can't fly at about 50,000 meters to our target. Okay, so we just passed 15,000 meters here. And I wanted to point something out is that according to my fuel gauges, we're carrying around about this much empty tank, this much empty tank. The middle one is about this much empty tank. So I'm carrying around 5 of these empty tanks. I wish I could get rid of them sooner so I don't have to carry these empty tanks around because they do weigh a lot. And there is a way to start doing that. Now, we'll see how far we can get here. Above 25,000 meters, I'm not really worried too much about drag or flying sideways or things like that, because frankly I'm still going up at an incredible rate, and the more I can start flying parallel to the planet, the better it will be. Because don't forget that we do need that horizontal speed to get over to our target here, not necessarily the vertical speed. We just did the vertical speed, what we do is go straight up and down. So our goal now is to accelerate and try to extend our trajectory out. It looks like we're going to make it. So I'm going to throttle down a little bit, bring up the ball, throttle down a little bit. We can see that we're almost there. How much fuel do I have left? Not much. So this is a good time to try and point out a few things about how to control where you come down. Now, when we start traveling in space like this, our goal is to land somewhere close to where we take off. And that's a difficult thing to do. But there's a few things you can do to help yourself. So one thing I can do is bring up this ball in the map view. It really helps you watch what's going on. You can control the engines and control the spacecraft. So I'm going to rotate us so that the ground is below us and the sky is above us. This is always in relation to the planet. We know that because it says orbit. And if we go look at the spacecraft, we can see that when I'm in chase view here, I am behind it. Okay. So if I want to bring this line up towards this area here, I want to turn towards the north. Now turning towards north is going to mean that I'm going to come this way. And we can see that the north is coming up in the ball right now. Now I'm not going to go completely pointed at north quite yet, because I can see the direction I'm still traveling is up, which makes sense because according to this arc, I am on my way up. I'm on my way to a height of 344,000 meters. But we're just going to give it a little bit of throttle and see what happens to this line. So I'll just leave a mouse right there, and okay. So you can see that we're not pointed straight at north, we're not pointed straight west. We were kind of pointed northwest there, and the line moved northwest from where we were. So let's turn the spacecraft just a little bit more and see what happens. So now, level us out. Alright. Now, we can see that we're flying sideways through space. And that's fine because there's no air up here. And we're just going to give it a little bit more throttle. And we can see that arc start coming around. Now, it's important to try and do these maneuvers as soon as you can, because little changes on this end of the trajectory make huge differences over on this side. It takes a little bit of fuel to change your arc when you're coming up. When you just first start, just make sure you're out of the atmosphere. But it'll take a ton of fuel to try and correct this when we're almost hitting the ground. I'm going to give it a little bit more fuel, see what we can do. We've got to be getting low on gas right now. And it's funny that I do reference gas because the R-7 was using liquid oxygen kerosene, which is amazing when you think about the types of advanced materials we have access to today. Alright, so we've put our arc perfectly on the island, and I've turned the throttle off. We're still flying sideways, so that's fine. But this is going to be a problem, because we know that even though we are at 285,000 meters, and pretty soon we're going to be at 361,000 meters, we know that we're going to have a problem, because as soon as we start getting below that 70,000 meter mark, and definitely as soon as we get below the 25,000 meter mark, we're going to start slowing down. What's going to happen to this line is it's going to start moving back. We're not going to maintain our speed all the way down until we hit the water just past the planet. You can see my line is moving just a tiny bit because the planet is revolving. We started with it on the island. Can't forget about that. So I'm just going to leave it as is and hope that the planet revolves enough to compensate for the amount the spacecraft slows down when it hits the atmosphere. And hopefully what that'll mean is that we'll hit this island dead center. So we'll see how good our guess is in a little bit. Alright, so I'm just warping here. We're watching that altimeter, and there. So we've hit the atmosphere. Where are we at? Well beyond the island. So I did mention this in my last episode that you can't underestimate how much the planet revolves. So we're going to go ahead and see where we splash down here and see how we did. Once I start hitting this 25,000 meter mark, this spacecraft isn't going to like flying sideways, and it's going to start tumbling, and there it goes. Now I'm not touching the controls right now, it's doing this on its own. It's got a lot of momentum because it just got swung around. It'll correct itself. And I could slow down a little bit by hitting the engines right now, but I actually don't want to. I want to try and get as much distance as we can. And I'll just fast forward down the splashdown. And again, the game mechanics struggle a little bit when you are in 4x warp. Alright, so we did very well. We covered 1.7 million meters. That's a lot more than we expected to. About 3 times our goal, so that's a terrific success. Now let's go ahead and see if we can't get a little bit better accuracy. Now there's 2 ways that we can increase our accuracy as far as we're going to splash down. We can either get a lot better at guessing how much the planet's going to revolve and how much the spacecraft's going to slow down when it hits the atmosphere, and that's very difficult. Not impossible, but it's not what we're going to get into yet. Much easier way to do it is to change the angle at which you're entering the atmosphere. So if we come in very flat and I'm only losing 1,000 meters per minute, let's say, that's coming down very slowly, but I'm going very fast through the atmosphere, it's really hard to judge how much drag is going to affect where I land. But if I'm coming straight down from space, from an orbit, straight down. No horizontal speed whatsoever, just pure vertical speed right into the Space Center. I'm pretty much guaranteed that I'm going to hit somewhere very, very close to the Space Center because I'm not traveling sideways through the atmosphere. So there's nothing to really affect the horizontal distance that I'm going to splash down within. So I'm going to grab a couple smaller fuel tanks here because, or I took the top fuel tanks off because we don't really need them, as we've seen. And we're going to do a little test. I'm going to aim for that island again and see if we still have enough fuel to get there. Now, I do want to get rid of these tanks as soon as possible because we don't like carrying empty tanks. But let's see if we have enough fuel to get there. Okay, it's starting to get late in the day here on Kerbin, and we're up for our next test. Still get off the bat just fine as you would expect. We still have the same engine, it's just a little less fuel. So I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same flight profile, get as close as I can get it, and see how far we can go with fuel. My guess is that we will not have enough fuel to get to that island. Whoops. Yep. Trying to turn while you're ejecting those tanks off. Happens every time. Okay. Did it right that time. Alright, we're going to turn west. And I'm going to try to fly level. And we'll see how far we get. Okay, well, surprise! We can hit the island. Now we know we're going to overshoot it from our test last time, but just to keep things the same, we even have a little bit of fuel left. So we brought less fuel up with us, and we were still able to fly exactly the same distance. And that's great, because it's a good example of why you're burning fuel to bring fuel with you. Fuel weighs a lot, and the more fuel you bring with you, the more fuel it's going to take to get all that extra fuel up into the atmosphere. Now, it's a long way of saying that the bigger your spacecraft is, the more fuel you're going to spend getting it up into orbit. Now, there's a few things we can do to adjust that, so we're going to go ahead and just end this flight because we know it's going to end up almost exactly the same as the last one, same amount of fuel and everything. I'm going to show you a good trick that's going to really help out with your staging. Now this is going to seem simple, but this will make the biggest difference with staged rockets, when you have multiple rockets, than anything else you'll do. What we want to do is, the goal is to get rid of these empty tanks and these heavy rockets and this wing and this nose cone times 4. We want to get rid of them as soon as possible. So they'll do their work, they'll get us up out of the atmosphere, and then get rid of them. It's very wasteful to fly up straight. We're burning all the tanks at the same rate. Now this tank is half full, this one's half full, and this one's half full. And we're carrying around 5 half-empty tanks. So it's the equivalent of carrying around 2.5 empty tanks when we're trying to get out of the atmosphere. Now, it'd be really nice if we could get rid of some of these tanks a lot sooner. So what we're going to do is, we're going to grab one of these fuel ducts. Basically, this is just a line. And we're going to say, I'm going to put on my 4x symmetry. I'm going to say, hey, external tank, I want you to give your fuel. See the arrows that indicate which direction the fuel's flowing to this tank. And what's going to happen there is, instead of all 5 engines using their tanks at the same rate, we're just going to ignore the top one for now. What's going to happen is that this central engine will pull from this tank, and this external engine will also pull from this tank first. So all the fuel from this tank is going to route to this engine and the central engine at the same time. What that means is we're going to run out of fuel in these external tanks way faster. And when we eject them off when they're empty, what you're left with is one engine, a full fuel tank here, because it did prefer the external tank first because of this fuel duct, and then another full tank on top of it. So what we should end up with is, instead of a half-empty tank and a full tank at about 25,000 meters, we should end up with two full tanks at maybe 20,000 meters, which is way better, because we've got a lot of fuel up in that higher atmosphere. And you can see, because of my symmetry mode, all the tanks are hooked up. So, long story short, the middle engine here is going to make each one of these external 4 fuel tanks use up their fuel 1.25 times faster, because this one engine is split 4 ways, so that's 1/4. 1.25 faster. Alright, so it's morning the next day. We're going to go ahead and try this launch. And now, what you're going to find is that on the fuel display, it's going to show that all 5 engines are still using up their fuels at the same percentages. So it shows that the central engine is running out of fuel, but that's because each engine is calculating how much total fuel it has available to it. So the central engine has both middle tanks and all 4 of the external tanks. But all 4 of the external tanks aren't doing too well because they're being used at 1.25 the rate of the other one. So you can see this is going down much faster than it used to. But as soon as I eject off these external tanks, you'll see this central engine, its fuel gauge, spring all the way up to 100% again, because there's still going to be two full tanks that will calculate out that it has all the fuel in the spacecraft available to it. So we're going to wait till these external tanks wear out, and you'll see that jump up. And now it's showing that I have full fuel. So I did have the throttle at about 2/3 there, so not necessarily as high, but what we're going to end up with is 2 full fuel tanks at exactly what we said, about 20,000 meters. So now that we're up out of that very thick atmosphere, we've got a lot of room to play with all this extra fuel. So we're going to go ahead and see where we're at with the map once we hit orbit here. There we go. So I'm going to rotate a little bit, so I'm just going to bring it down. Point the spacecraft west again. We're past a little bit. No sense throttling into the planet. And come on. There. So now that we're locked in, we'll go ahead and fly parallel to the planet, and we'll see where we end up. Now this is my series that it's my first Let's Play series, and I really enjoy doing it. I'd love to keep doing it, but if you enjoy it too, please give it a like, please give it a subscribe, or leave a comment. Just let me know that what I'm doing is appreciated. I'd appreciate it a lot. It does take a lot of time to do these, but I really enjoy it, and I'll continue doing them. So we'll continue our burn and see where we end up. So it's getting hard to see because the sun is in our way. You can see the moon is just past an eclipse of the sun there. But if I look at Kerbin, it's difficult to see in your player, I know, but the center of the crater is right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust our flight path again just a little bit. Get the distance first. And then I'm going to turn to the north. Spacecraft isn't moving quite as fast as it was before. That probably tells me that it's a little bit heavier than it was. So I'm thinking that we have quite a bit more than just that sliver of fuel. Do a little bit of burn to adjust our landing position. Right from the middle of this island here, a little bit over. Throttle down, and there we are. So now we're going to land
probably halfway between the island and the outside rim of that crater. And when we come back and look, we'll probably have about 3 times the fuel that we did before. So just by adding those fuel ducts, we were able to get rid of those heavy, empty fuel tanks sooner, and then really get some work done in the higher altitudes. So, thanks for joining me, and tune in next time. The space race is on. We're into the Cold War now, and this is when things really start getting exciting. So, I'll see you next time. Thanks.